Chainsaw Man Chapter 215 isn't just another clash of devils. Instead, it's really a warning narratively. Denji and Mitaka, they aren't fighting for the world, even though they're having to fight each other because of Pochita and Yoru being locked in battle. But instead, Fujimoto, when you really look at it, he has locked them inside of the same endless alley with no exit in sight. They are suffering when you think about it. If you think this is just another setup for another bloody fight, really think again, because this chapter is setting the stage for what I believe is going to be Denji's most devastating heartbreak ever. Chapter 215 proves that Asa is walking straight into a tragedy, and why her downfall could shatter Denji in a way that no loss has really hit him, not even someone like Nayuta, and I'll explain to you why. Just to re-clarify, this is not just another escalation of War Devil versus Chainsaw Devil. This is one of Fujimoto's most symbolically loaded chapters. It is setting up a deeper commentary on identity, trauma, and the inevitability of loss itself through the way that Denji and Mitaka, when you look at part 2 closely, they are framed as being inverses to one another. The exploration of Mitaka's psychological torment and the foreshadowing of Denji's next mental break. So let's just jump right into it. So Denji and Mitaka, why do I say that they are an inverse, and why does this chapter highlight this? So ever since the beginning of part 2, Mitaka has been a dark reflection of Denji from an inverse perspective, loosely. Chapter 215, it really crystallizes this duality by presenting both of them as individuals who technically survived their initial deaths, but they lost something far more vital in the process when you think about it. Denji's death in chapter 1 of part 1 was followed by his fusion with Pochita, a rebirth that allowed his mind and his body to move forward. He died a gruesome death, but he got a second chance at life. Yet, every time we've seen Denji in this hallway, when you read between the lines, it feels like Fujimoto has consistently suggested that part of Denji never really left that moment. We have a reoccurring imagery of Kid Denji, who is constantly wandering that claustrophobic alley. He is isolated, he is searching. He is told not to go through the door in part 1, and we see what happens when he did. This, in a way, implies that his soul is still kind of trapped in limbo to a degree. His outward self, it is fighting onward, but the child, who once longed for happiness, remains frozen in time. Even though Denji was an adult when he, or rather a teenager when he got cut down, we are consistently seeing child Denji for a reason. Then when you get into Mitaka's death in chapter 1 of part 2, there's also an eerie parallel here. She is revived via Yoru, the War Devil. She too exists in a state of half-life when you think about it from that perspective. Unlike Denji, whose body was empowered by Pochita, someone who was not looking for the worst possible outcome for Denji, Mitaka, she is shackled by Yoru. She is reduced to being a passenger of her own existence. Yoru is the ultimate gaslighter, and Yoru is somebody who does not care how she uses and abuses Mitaka's body. Her body is fighting battles, but her soul, as we see in this chapter, it is still wandering inside her endless alley. She is chasing after something that she says that she can never quite reach. And one thing of note here is that when we first saw Mitaka in part 2, wandering through the alley, we saw all those dead chickens, might have been dead bodies. And now the alley is clear. Just as we eventually got to see what was behind the door for Denji, we're about to see what it is that Mitaka's been chasing. Both characters, they embody survival at the expense of wholeness. Fujimoto is binding them together as halves of the same tragedy, setting the stage for an inevitable collusion. That is why we had to see Yoru be the devil who descended from hell. That is why we had to see Yoru tell Fami, or rather tell Lil D, hey, when you were known as Fami, these were the friends that you liked. I'm holding them hostage. If you don't do what I say, if you try to kill me, my minions will kill your friends. We needed to see this because it has to highlight the difference between Pochita and Yoru. This is also why we had to see that moment where Yoru is calling out to Pochita saying, you and I are tied 1-1. This next battle, it will decide everything, the fate of the world per se. It was all to serve as a bridge to get us to the end of the chapter, which is Asa Mitaka's alley, the pursuit of the unreachable. That is the most haunting moment in chapter 215. It is a glimpse into Mitaka's consciousness, her subconsciousness, and we see Denji there as well. When Denji finds her in that dream reality, she admits that she's been chasing something for a long time. This mirrors Denji's own dream sequences in part 1, particularly the infamous door that symbolized his repressed trauma that had to deal with his father and the curse of inevitable tragedy. When you really look back at Denji in part 1, when we saw him as a child at times, we saw things like the calm before the storm, right before we find out that Aki Hayakawa was going to die. This alley, it represents more than just a visual metaphor. In a way, it represents Mitaka for her futility, her desperate, endless pursuit of longing, companionship, and her sense of self in the beginning. At the beginning of part 2, she was a lonely girl, craving for a single friend, and then she died a tragic death, and she was given a second chance. Over time, you could see Mitaka clinging to some of that hope, but also slowly losing it as well. With Yoru commandeering her body, Mitaka has been reduced to at times nothing more than a spectator of her own life, watching as her one chance at a connection, it is being sabotaged by the war devil. It is being sabotaged by war and violence in general. She has feelings for Denji, that much is made clear, and yet you could look at it and say that because Yoru took over Mitaka's body, she gave Denji that hand job in the alley, Mitaka was right there. She's doing all that against her will. Yoru knows as much, in my opinion. The way that in this chapter she's shown pointing into the alley at nothing, it underlines this futility. Maybe in the next chapter we see what it is that she's chasing after, but for right now, we don't necessarily know what it is she's pursuing. She's not pursuing, in my opinion, a tangible goal, but instead an abstract longing, a connection that she will never truly reach as long as Yoru is the one that controls her. Maybe we'll see a physical anchor in the next chapter, but I do believe since Denji's door does symbolize the repression of trauma and the inevitability of loss, Mitaka's alley symbolizes the endless chase after something unattainable. It suggests that she is not just lost, but she might be doomed to remain so. This gets deeper when you look at it from the lens of this might be a looming tragedy of Mitaka. This chapter strongly implies that Mitaka is being set up for an unhappy ending. Fujimoto doesn't need to state it directly. He just shows it through repetition if you read it closely. Just, at least in my interpretation, just as Denji's child self is shown wandering through the alleys at times, Mitaka, she too has been condemned to chase the shadows. Both are characters who, despite having technically survived, in a way, because we see childlike versions of them, an older version for Mitaka, but a childlike version for Denji, in a way they are in a type of purgatory. That cruel irony is that Mitaka's tragedy is not necessarily one of her own mistakes, unlike Denji, whose choices they carry consequences. Mitaka, she is a victim of circumstance, her loneliness, her deal with Yoru, and the way that she's been forced to witness as her body becomes a weapon. This helplessness makes her suffering all the more real and tangible for us as readers, and it suggests that her fate may not necessarily be something cathartic, but instead it could be cruel. Fujimoto has shown a willingness to kill beloved characters in ways that emphasize inevitability rather than justice per se. If Mitaka falls, it won't be because it's deserved, but instead it's because of the system of devils and things that are stacked against her from the very start. Then when you flip this over to Denji, this makes the Pochita portion of the chapter where Pochita slices up Yoru in this battle that's likely going to keep waging on. This is why that matters. If Mitaka's death or permanent entrapment is where Fujimoto is heading, the emotional weight will fall the hardest on Denji. Chapter 215 subtly positions Mitaka as not just another tragic figure, but as the embodiment of Denji's own reflection. Losing her would mean losing the person who most clearly mirrored his own brokenness, and also someone who joins that short list of females in the series that actually cared for Denji, yet Denji had to have that ripped away from him. Denji, in my opinion, is beginning to realize that. Denji has already endured unimaginable pain in the story. Aki's transformation into the gun fiend, Power's brutal death, Nayuta's demise at the hands of somebody like Barum, though that could have been the Death Devil, as some of you guys have pointed out in the comment section. The same thing with Yoshida. That is always a possibility. But as of right now, Denji is dealing with yet another trauma. Each of these moments was marked by the haunting imagery where you see Kid Denji and he's wandering his subconscious alleys, or he's shown as a child in some type of a way. This repetition builds the sense that Denji himself is cursed to watch everyone he loves fall. That is why we had to see Kid Denji even when he's confronted by the Fire Devil. It is a repetition by Fujimoto. But Asa Mitaka, she is the different one here. This is why this chapter is so beautiful. It's not necessarily what happens inside the chapter, but what the chapter itself represents. She's not simply another companion. She's not simply somebody that could have fallen in love with Denji under the right circumstances and has even fallen in love with them. We could make that strong argument, but instead, she is his inverse, the soul half of his body. Her loss would not only add to Denji's grief, but it would confirm the greatest fear that the narrative is trying to lay out for us, that no one like Denji can ever truly find happiness. Losing Mitaka would validate the idea that survival for people like them is really just another form of damnation, because you make connections, then connections are ripped away from you. Mitaka's alley also kind of ties into the concept of lost souls. I've always been of the belief that when Denji was brought back and when Mitaka was brought back, the fact that we see them in that alley and etc., that was Fujimoto dabbling with the concept of purgatory. Their body and their mind was back, but to a degree, a piece of their soul was left back. I feel like there's a dual layer here. So this sequence with the alleys and the door for Denji, it can be read through the lens of Buddhist and Shinto ideals that are surrounding death, rebirth, and wandering spirits. In Buddhism, the endless alley represents samsara, the cycle of suffering where souls are trapped, endlessly repeating desires and failures. Mitaka's statement that she has been chasing something for so long, it echoes this idea. She is caught in that karmic loop, unable to attain liberation because her very existence, it is bound to Yoru's will. Go back to when Yoru basically made her the offer, you're going to die, but I can give you a second chance. Then in Shinto and Japanese folklore, alleys, they often invoke Yuri, which are restless spirits who linger in different spaces, often tied to unresolved emotions like loneliness, regret, and betrayal. Go back to when we first met Mitaka when she was dying. Those were emotions that we did see her feel. Mitaka, trapped in this mental alley, is essentially a Yuri of herself, a ghost wandering her own subconscious, denied peace because she has that connection with the War Devil. The imagery also resonates with the folklore of impermanence and the realm of the hungry ghost. Mitaka's endless chase for connection and belonging is like a hungry ghost's futile attempt to satisfy its cravings. She can point towards something, but she can never truly grasp it based on how this is being presented. Seen in this way, Mitaka, we could say that part of her is already symbolically dead, just as we could say part of Denji's childhood, because it is also trapped in that limbo to a degree. They're both still seeking closure. They're both still seeking liberation. I believe that her eventual fate may not be about a physical death, but instead about her spirit's inability to ever escape from this cycle. When it does happen, it's going to be heartbreaking. It's a chapter, this chapter is a emotional foreshadowing. On the surface, again, 215 shows the War Devil and Chainsaw Man, they get locked into a battle, but beneath the action, Fujimoto is laying a tapestry of psychological and symbolic foreshadowing. The real fight is not between devils, but within the souls of Denji and Mitaka, two characters whose survival, it is indistinguishable from suffering itself, and seeing both of them in that alley together was definitely intentional. By showing them both trapped in the alleys, each chasing something, looking for something, Fujimoto is preparing us as the audience for the possibility that this story may not grant them salvation. Instead, it may deliver Denji's most painful loss ever, watching Mitaka have to die, confirming that basically he got lucky by getting someone like Pochita, because he could have got someone like Yoru the way that Mitaka did. Chapter 215, I feel like this is one of Fujimoto's most devastating setups yet. Though the parallel imagery is there, with Denji and Mitaka, it does work. It highlights how both characters, they're survivors, yet at the same time, parts of their souls are still left behind. Mitaka's alley dream, it was meant to warn us that her story may not end in hope like Denji's did in the start of part 1. You felt hopeful that Denji was turning things around, but instead, Mitaka, if she's the inverse, she might be headed towards an initial conclusion that is despair, and her downfall is she does die. I feel like this could be one of the most cruelest loss that Denji has ever had. Rather than promising triumph, this chapter does suggest that Chainsaw Man is circling back to its oldest theme. The price of survival, it isn't necessarily life, but instead it's the haunting persistence of loss. And now we have to see how would Denji handle that if Pochita has to kill Mitaka by killing Yoru. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking here on the left to check out more Chainsaw Man content, or click here to check out other videos from the Anime Explained channel.